They were loved by millions, recognized on every street. Their faces launched careers, defined eras, and made people laugh for decades. But when they died, something strange happened. The rooms were quiet, the seats were empty, and in some cases, no one came at all. One actor died and lay undiscovered for days. Another's body sat in a morgue while strangers fought over what little he had left. And one, despite being known by the entire world, was laid to rest in near silence. These are the tragic stories of actors who spent their lives in the spotlight, only to be forgotten at the very end. Gene Hackman. Gene Hackman was one of the most recognizable faces in American cinema. For 4 decades, he commanded the screen in ways that few actors ever achieve. He played heroes and villains with equal intensity, earning 5 Oscar nominations and 2 wins along the way. His name was synonymous with excellence. Audiences knew him, critics revered him, and yet, when he died in February 2025 at the age of 95, the funeral that followed was not what anyone would have expected for a man of his stature. Hackman's rise to fame began in 1967 with his role as Buck Barrow in Bonnie and Clyde. That performance earned him his first Academy Award nomination for Best Supporting Actor. 5 years later, he won his first Oscar for Best Actor playing NYPD Detective Jimmy Popeye Doyle in The French Connection. It was a role that cemented his place in Hollywood history. In 1978, he took on the role of arch-villain Lex Luthor in Superman, a part that introduced him to a new generation of moviegoers. He reprised the role in sequels, proving that he could be just as compelling in blockbuster films as he was in intimate dramas. His second Oscar came in 1992 for Best Supporting Actor as corrupt sheriff Little Bill Daggett in Clint Eastwood's Unforgiven. By that point, he had already delivered iconic performances in films like The Conversation, Hoosiers, Mississippi Burning, Crimson Tide, and The Royal Tenenbaums. Over the course of his career, he appeared in nearly 80 films. He received 2 BAFTA Awards, 3 Golden Globes, and the Cecil B. DeMille Award in 2003. When he made his final film appearance in the 2004 political satire Welcome to Mooseport, he walked away without fanfare. He simply stopped acting. What followed was a quiet life. Hackman moved to Santa Fe, New Mexico, where he spent his time writing novels. He published a Western, a police thriller, and 3 works of historical fiction. He appeared publicly only once after his retirement in 2008 as a customer on an episode of Food Network's Diners, Drive-Ins, and Dives at a Santa Fe restaurant he frequented. For nearly 2 decades, he lived a peaceful existence with his second wife, Betsy Arakawa. The world assumed he was enjoying the retirement he had earned. But the circumstances of his death revealed something far more tragic than anyone had imagined. On February 26, 2025, authorities found Hackman and his wife, Arakawa, dead in their Santa Fe home. An investigation followed, and the results were devastating. Betsy Arakawa had died first, around February 11th, from hantavirus pulmonary syndrome, a rare disease transmitted by infected rodent droppings. Gene Hackman, who was suffering from advanced Alzheimer's disease, was left alone in the house with his wife's body. He did not know she was gone. His condition prevented him from understanding what had happened. He continued living in the home for approximately 1 week after her death, unaware that he was alone. The autopsy later showed that Hackman died of heart disease on February 18th. His blood acetone levels were significantly elevated, indicating he had stopped eating for a substantial period after his wife died. He was found in the home, still believing she was alive. Hackman was survived by 3 children from his first marriage to Faye Maltese, Christopher, Elizabeth, and Leslie. They were his only living relatives. But when his will was made public, it revealed that his 3 children had been excluded from his estimated $80 million estate. The entire inheritance went to his wife, Betsy Arakawa. And because Betsy died before him, the terms of the will meant that his estate would be handled differently than his children had anticipated. A private burial ceremony was held in New Mexico 2 months after his death, delayed by the investigation. His children organized the service despite being excluded from his will. They made the arrangements, they attended, and they said their goodbyes. However, for a man who had been known by millions, who had been celebrated by his peers, who had received the highest honors his industry could bestow, the attendance at his funeral was remarkably small. But Gene Hackman was not the only actor to experience a funeral where the seats remained empty. There was another man, one who never reached the same level of fame, but whose absence from his own funeral was even more striking: Gerald Sullivan. Gene Hackman's funeral drew a small crowd, but at least his children were there to arrange the service and say their goodbyes. For Gerald Sullivan, there were no children, no relatives, and no one to claim his body when he died. He was a man who had served his country, who had been known in his community as a friendly presence, and who died alone in a small home in South Wales with no one to mourn him. Gerald Sullivan served in the Royal Air Force during the 1950s. He was a serviceman for his country during a time when military service carried a different kind of weight. He was also a consistent character actor and extra who appeared in several roles in British television and film throughout the 1970s and 80s. His face appeared in the background of productions like Z-Cars, Doctor Who, and several BBC dramas. In the acting community, he was known as a reliable presence, someone who showed up on time, knew his marks, and never caused trouble. After his service ended, he settled in Pont-Lotin, a small village in South Wales. He lived in a modest semi-detached home, the kind of house where neighbors know each other by name. To those who lived near him, he was a familiar and welcome presence. He was described by people who knew him as the perfect gentleman with the most contagious smile. He always had time to say hello and give a helping hand. But as the years passed, the people around him began to notice something. Sullivan had no family. He had never married, never had children, and any relatives he might have had were gone. He lived alone in his small home, and as he entered his late 70s, his health began to decline. Neighbors checked on him when they could, but he was largely on his own. When he fell ill with pneumonia in October 2015, there was no one to take him to the hospital. He died on October 27th at the age of 80. His body was discovered by neighbors who had not seen him for several days. When the reality of his situation became clear, the people in his community faced a difficult truth. Sullivan had no means of paying for his own funeral. He had no savings set aside for burial costs. He had no family to arrange a service or to fund one. Without intervention, he would have received what is known as a pauper's funeral, a basic cremation with no service, no ceremony, and no acknowledgement of the life he had lived. One neighbor decided that was not acceptable. Matthew Wheaton had known Sullivan for 17 years. He viewed the elderly man as an uncle, a constant presence in his life since childhood. Wheaton stepped forward and became Sullivan's nominated next of kin, even though they were not related. He began arranging a funeral, but there were no funds available to pay for it. He turned to the internet, setting up an online fundraising campaign. The campaign might have gone unnoticed, but one person saw it who had the ability to change everything. Actor Michael Sheen, who was born in Wales and had strong ties to the community, came across the fundraising page. He did not know Gerald Sullivan personally, but he understood what was at stake. Sheen donated £500 to kickstart the fund. His contribution brought attention to the campaign, and soon others followed. In total, approximately £3,800 was raised, enough to give Sullivan the funeral he deserved. The service began with a small gathering outside Sullivan's flat, just as he had wanted. From there, the procession moved to Rhymney Cemetery in Wales, where he was buried. Michael Sheen did not attend the funeral. He sent flowers instead, a quiet acknowledgement of the role he had played. The wake was held at the Empire Club in Pont-Lotin, a local gathering place where neighbors and friends could share memories of the man they had known. For a man who had no family, the turnout was meaningful, but it was also a reminder that without the intervention of a neighbor and the generosity of a stranger, Gerald Sullivan would have been buried with no one at all. His story is not unique. There are countless people who die alone, without family, without resources, without anyone to mark their passing. But for an actor, it's more heartbreaking, and his story stood out because of the contrast it created with another story, one involving a different actor, a different life, and a funeral that drew a crowd for all the wrong reasons. Gary Coleman. Gary Coleman had fame, fortune, and millions of people who knew his face. And yet, when he died at 42 years old, His body sat in a Utah morgue for weeks while strangers fought over what little he had left. Gary Coleman's rise to fame was unlike almost any other child actor of his era. He began his career in 1974 with a commercial for Harris Bank and an appearance on the television show Medical Center. But it was the role of Arnold Jackson on Different Strokes that made him a household name. The show, which aired from 1978 to 1986, followed two black brothers from Harlem who were adopted by a wealthy white widower in Manhattan. Coleman played the younger brother, and his character's catchphrase, "What you talking about, Willis?" became embedded in American pop culture. At the height of his fame, he was earning $100,000 per episode. VH1 later ranked him #1 on their list of the 100 greatest child stars on television. But behind the scenes, his life was unraveling in ways that the public would not fully understand until years later. Coleman was born with a kidney disease that stunted his growth, leaving him at 4 feet 8 inches tall. He underwent multiple transplants and endured dialysis treatments throughout his childhood. The medical issues were constant, and so were the people managing his money. In 1989, he sued his adoptive parents and former business advisor for misappropriation of his trust fund. He alleged that they had taken money that was rightfully his. He won a judgment of $1,280,000 in 1993, but the damage to his finances had already been done. By August 1999, he filed for bankruptcy protection. Ongoing medical expenses had drained what remained. His personal struggles became public in ways that were painful to watch. In 1998, he was charged with assault after punching a woman who approached him for an autograph in a California mall. He pleaded no contest, received a suspended jail sentence, and was ordered to take anger management classes. In a 1993 television interview, he made a confession that shocked viewers. He said he had struggled deeply with his mental health. The boy who had made millions of people laugh was privately dealing with a level of despair that no one around him seemed to notice or address. In 2007, Coleman married Shannon Price. They had met on the set of a film called Church Ball, where she worked as an extra. The marriage lasted barely a year. They divorced in August 2008, though Price later claimed they continued a common-law marriage until his death. That claim would become central to what happened after Coleman died, because a judge ultimately ruled against Price after evidence showed she had carried on affairs during the claimed common-law marriage and had physically maltreated Coleman in public. The relationship was troubled, but it was also the closest thing to family that Coleman had at the end of his life. On May 28, 2010, Gary Coleman died in Provo, Utah, at the age of 42. He had fallen at his home in Santaquin, suffering an epidural hematoma, a type of brain hemorrhage that proved fatal. A Biography Channel documentary later estimated that after paying parents, advisors, lawyers, and taxes, Coleman was left with only a quarter of the earnings he had made during his career. The money he had fought to protect was gone, but the chaos did not end with his death. His will, which he had signed in 1999, was explicit. It stated that no funeral service was to take place. It also demanded that attendees, had there been a service, be limited to those with no financial ties to him, who could look each other in the eyes and say they really cared personally for Gary Coleman. The language was sharp, deliberate, and revealing. Coleman had spent his life surrounded by people who profited from his fame. He wanted to make sure that after he was gone, no one could pretend otherwise for the sake of a public spectacle. Despite the clarity of the will, a legal battle erupted between his ex-wife Shannon Price and his ex-girlfriend Anna Gray over his Utah house, which was valued at approximately $315,000. The dispute delayed any final arrangements for weeks. His body remained in the morgue while lawyers argued over who had the right to claim his remains. On June 16, 2010, a judge finally ordered cremation. The court-appointed administrator announced that no funeral would take place, citing both the stipulations in Coleman's will and the ongoing estate disputes. There was no service or no gathering of friends. The man who had been one of the most famous faces on television, who had made millions of people laugh, who had been ranked the greatest child star of all time, was cremated without a single person present to say goodbye. His ashes were handled by a court administrator, not by family or friends. Coleman's story is often told as a cautionary tale about child stardom, about the exploitation of young actors, and about the way money and fame can destroy a life. But his funeral, or lack of one, tells a different story of a man who, in his final years, had so little trust in the people around him that he explicitly forbade a ceremony. But his story is not the only one where a celebrity's final arrangements became a spectacle. There was another man, a singer whose voice defined an era, but whose funeral turned into something he never would have wanted. Zero Hubbard. Zero Hubbard's career began when he was a child. His agent would send checks to the family, and his mother would cash them at a local liquor store. It was a modest start, but it led to steady work. His most recognized role came when he was cast as Fabian DeWitt on Hill Street Blues, the hit police drama that redefined television in the 1980s. He played Betty Thomas's adopted son, appearing in 14 episodes from season 3 through season 7, spanning the years 1983 to 1987. For a young actor, it was a significant role on a critically acclaimed show. He worked almost non-stop as an actor until 2003, building a career that spanned 2 decades. But behind that career was a personal life marked by tragedy. When Zero was 16 years old, his mother was killed in a dispute at a liquor store. The circumstances were devastating. The store owner had demanded that she pay money. Zero owed them, and during the dispute, she was shot. Zero carried guilt over his mother's death for the rest of his life. He blamed himself for what happened, for the argument that led to her death, and for being the reason she was in that store at that moment. It was a weight that never left him. After his mother died, he was taken in by Betty Bridges, a respected acting teacher in the black community and the mother of actor Todd Bridges. Betty offered him free acting lessons when he expressed interest but could not afford them. Eventually, she allowed him to move into her home. She became his adoptive mother, providing the stability he had lost. The Bridges family became his family, but the trauma of his childhood, the loss of his mother, and the guilt he carried never fully healed. By the time acting roles stopped coming in 2003, Zero had been married and divorced multiple times. He was a father to 10 children. The steady work that had defined his 20s and 30s dried up, and he found himself needing to start over. He moved to Flagstaff, Arizona, where he managed a health and massage spa to pay the bills. It was a quiet life, far removed from the sets of Hollywood and the recognition that had once followed him. On May 16, 2025, Zero Hubbard died at the age of 54. The cause was complications from pneumonia, a rhinovirus infection, and heart failure. There was a cruel irony in the timing. Had he lived just one more year until he turned 55, he would have qualified for his Screen Actors Guild pension. That pension, which he had earned through decades of work, would have provided some financial security in his final years, but he did not make it. At the time of his death, his bank account was empty. What happened next was unlike almost any other celebrity death. His passing went unreported for 9 months. The actor, who had appeared in one of the most iconic television shows of his era, died without a headline, without tributes from his former co-stars, and without the kind of recognition that usually accompanies the death of anyone who had been on television for nearly 2 decades. His family set up a GoFundMe page to cover funeral costs, but the campaign raised less than half of its target. The money simply was not there. A small, intimate memorial service was held in June, about a month after his death. It was attended by family and a few close friends. His sister, Barbara Hubbard, spoke about the service afterward. She said they did their best to give Zero a small, intimate send-off. It was a modest statement, but it captured the reality of what had happened. There was no public mourning, no industry tributes, and no outpouring of grief from fans who remembered his face. Zero Hubbard's case stands in stark contrast to what happened with another actor whose death drew massive attention. That actor had fame, fortune, and a fan base that mourned him publicly. But even with all that attention, his funeral was marked by a different kind of absence. The people who knew him best, the ones who had been closest to him in life, did not attend, and their absence told a story that no headline could capture. Matthew Perry. Matthew Perry's death was announced within hours, covered by every major news outlet, and mourned by millions of fans around the world. He was one of the most beloved actors of his generation, the man who played Chandler Bing on Friends, a show that defined television for an entire era. And yet, when his funeral was held on November 3, 2023, the list of attendees was strikingly small. The rows of seats that might have been filled by Hollywood's elite remained empty. Matthew Perry's career extended far beyond Friends. He appeared in films including Fools Rush In and The Whole Nine Yards, and he worked as a writer and producer on various projects. But it was his role as Chandler Bing that cemented his place in pop culture history. For 10 seasons, from 1994 to 2004, he made millions of people laugh with his sarcastic delivery and impeccable timing. Behind the scenes, however, his life was a different story. In 2022, he published his memoir, Friends, Lovers, and the Big Terrible Thing. The book laid bare the decades-long struggle with addiction that had defined much of his adult life. He wrote about his dependence on illicit substances and alcohol, about the multiple hospitalizations, about the surgeries, about the times he came close to death. At the time of the memoir's publication, he stated that he had been sober for approximately 18 months. It seemed to many readers like a hard-won victory. But the addiction that had haunted him for decades never fully released its grip. On October 28, 2023, Matthew Perry was found unconscious in a hot tub at his Los Angeles home. He was 54 years old. The Los Angeles County Medical Examiner's Office later determined that he died from the acute effects of a medication. Contributing factors included drowning, coronary artery disease, and a medication used to treat addiction. The manner of death was ruled an accident. It was a conclusion that matched the pattern of his life, not a deliberate ending, but the consequence of a body that had been pushed too far for too long. The funeral was held 6 days later on November 3rd at Forest Lawn Cemetery in the Hollywood Hills neighborhood of Los Angeles. Forest Lawn sits less than 1 kilometer from the Warner Brothers studio where Friends was filmed. It was a location that carried meaning, a place close to the set where he had spent a decade of his life. Approximately 20 people dressed in black attended and gathered around the burial plot. For a man of his fame, for a star of a show that reached hundreds of millions of viewers worldwide, 20 people was a remarkably small number. All 5 of his surviving Friends co-stars attended. Jennifer Aniston, Courtney Cox, Lisa Kudrow, Matt LeBlanc, and David Schwimmer were there. They came together to say goodbye to the man they had worked beside for 10 years. Their presence was noted by every outlet that covered the service, and for many fans, it was a comfort to know that the cast had remained close enough to show up for each other in that moment. His father, John Bennett Perry, was also in attendance, as was his stepfather, Keith Morrison, the longtime Dateline correspondent who had been a steady presence in Perry's life. But beyond that inner circle, the attendance was sparse. There were no crowds of celebrities, no procession of Hollywood executives, no reunion of the guest stars and directors and writers who had worked with him over the years. The people who were there were the ones who mattered most: his family and the 5 actors who had shared the stage with him for a decade. Everyone else, it seemed, stayed away. What made the funeral notable was not who came, but who did not. In the days after Perry's death, tributes poured in from across the entertainment industry. Former co-stars, directors, producers, and fans shared memories and expressed grief. Social media was flooded with condolences. But when it came time to gather in person, to stand beside his grave and pay respects in the traditional way, the crowd did not materialize. There was just a small group of people who had known him longest and loved him best. For some observers, the small turnout was a reflection of the life Perry had lived. Addiction can isolate a person, even one as famous as he was. The years of struggle, the hospitalizations, the relapses, and the times he had to step away from work to seek treatment. All of that shaped not only his life, but also his relationships. People who had once been close to him may have drifted away over the years. Others may have been uncertain whether their presence would be welcome. Still others may have chosen to mourn privately rather than in public. The contrast between his funeral and the public mourning that surrounded it was striking. Millions of fans watched Friends reruns, posted tributes, and lit candles in his memory. The show's streaming numbers spiked in the days after his death. But at the graveside, the crowd was small. It was a reminder that fame, no matter how immense, does not guarantee a large funeral. The people who show up in the end are not always the people who knew you at the height of your success. Sometimes, they are just the ones who stayed. Matthew Perry's funeral was not a spectacle. It was not a media event. It was a quiet gathering of the people who had been part of his life when it mattered most. For a man who had spent decades in the spotlight, who had been loved by millions of strangers, the smallness of his final gathering said something about the difference between being famous and being known. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to click on the next video on your screen, like this video, and subscribe to our channel for more updates.